Yes, hello. I'm Paul Griffin. I'm a professor of management at the University of California, Davis. And my co-author here is Estelle Sun. Estelle is a professor at Boston University in Massachusetts. What we're going to talk about today is the notion or the developing area of carbon tech and what it's doing there in terms of technology to provide services on carbon mapping and carbon footprints. And it's really challenging the role of the accounting profession, which in many ways should be doing or entering this particular in much the same way. So that's really what we're doing. I want to thank you, Peter, for having me on the program. So let me go to the next slide here. And just to remind people that carbon tech is a new developing area, largely of technology, and the focus is on carbon reduction. And within carbon tech, there's an area which we call, or others call, carbon accounting. And carbon accounting is primarily focused on measuring, assessing, disclosing, managing emissions. And so the service or activity, it's all based around emissions. And we're talking about all forms of emissions, not just the internal emissions of the firm, but what we call the scope 2, and the big elephant in the room, obviously, is the scope 3. So carbon tech has taken on this and is doing, from what I can gather, a very, very good job in mapping, measuring, and teaching firms how to manage their carbon emissions. But the next element of this is really one of the triggers for the development of this area, and that is a regulatory element here, and that is being required. That is emissions disclosures being required by firms pretty much all over the world. So, if you just take an example, we take a large U.S. company, has operations in California, the United Kingdom, and European Union. This is a typical large company. They would likely have to comply with the reporting guidance of at least seven frameworks, namely the IFRS framework, that's called the S1 framework, California, that's SB 253 and 261, the Carbon Sustainability Reporting Directive, that's an EU initiative, TCFD, the Task Force Carbon Climate Financial Disclosure, the SEC, the Streamlined Energy Carbon Reporting, that's in the UK, and then, of course, the CDP, which has been around for a while. So all of these things are a bit different and requires quite a detailed knowledge to put all this together to efficiently provide this information for management and for the regulators that require this. So that's what carbon tech is. But the question is whether the accounting profession is up to engaging in this particular industry, which is growing by leaps and bounds. If you look at the industry today, as mostly encased in private equity, one of the larger companies is Watershed, has a current value of about $1.7 billion, and judged to have a 96% percentage of a successful effort. That's meaning that people like supporting Watershed, that's Al Gore, John Doerr, and others like that, Mark Carney, for example, these people are going to make a lot of money. This is a large firm. It's developed and built on technology. Another one is Persephone. Many people have heard of that as well. That's out of Arizona. And they're a little bit smaller in size, but almost $500 million in market cap. And they also probably going to be successfully exiting into the public markets before too long. If you look at the forecasts of this industry, the sales revenue this year, 2024, is expected to be about $18 billion. That's the sales of providing these services. But it's going to grow to about $100 billion in 2032, and that's a 26% compound growth rate in the industry. But then, and for any industry, that's tremendous growth rate. We're talking about an industry which is built on risk, which is built on risk capital, built on private equity, and that's very different to what the accounting profession looks like. Accounting profession tends to be risk averse. It's built on a sort of financial model, which is a partnership model, and it really can't go to the capital markets to raise equity capital. So it's somewhat constrained in that sense, but it could be constrained for a reason, because obviously there are auditing services as well that are to be provided. Let me go to my next slide in terms of what we do. What is our research issue here? And to understand maybe how this race is getting underway, we looked at job placements or job skills that are being sought, and we compared the top 100 accounting firms along with the carbon tech industry. And we identified carbon tech using the private equity database called PitchBook. So we have two samples of firms that potentially engaged in this carbon tech. We want to see what they're doing with respect to carbon tech. And we essentially run a sort of fairly straightforward event study. Everybody knows what an event study is. So the first event is the March 2022 release of the SEC proposal for emissions reporting. So that was a big deal and invited huge numbers of comments, literally thousands and thousands of comments being presented to the SEC onto how they should mandate or write up the particular emission disclosure rule. As it turns out, they sort of took a pass on Scope 3, but that's another issue. The second event we're looking at is the what's called the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Inflation Reduction Act was the biggest, apparently the biggest in American history, of funding from the government on clean tech and sort of climate solutions, basically. So there's a lot of money here potentially available to the carbon tech or even the carbon accounting tech industry. And we wanted to see what the job skills being sought around these two events were, which brings me to my next slide here. And you can see this very, very simple event study of the spikes in job placement as we look through 2022, 23, and then we go to actually into 2024. I'm using the most recent data, but the first graph that you see there, the one in orange, that's the one for the accounting firms, and very clearly you see this really unusual spike here, and we think, well, what's that spike? What are they doing with that spike? Well, it happens to be around the time that firms were having to respond to the SEC proposal for climate issues. So the accounting firms, using their knowledge and having access to clients, they said, well, let's help. Let's help write these particular rules or write a response to the proposal. So you see a big increase there. But nothing much is going on in the hiring after that. You can see that the orange lines are pretty stable, pretty steady. And then we looked at the carbon tech firms. They're not doing anything or much at all around the time of the SEC proposal. But when the Inflation Reduction Act comes along, that's like August, September, October of 2022, you can see there's the spike in the hiring for these firms. And so the long and short of that is that we're concluding that what the accounting firms are doing, yes, they're responding to sort of climate tech, but they're doing it in the way that's used to their way of doing business, which is to hire people to help clients write responses to particular rules. But the carbon tech firms are more likely to be hiring because they're investing, developing technologies and services and so forth. So that's the main result of our paper. What's the takeaway from on the paper? Well, in a few years' time, based on this analysis and a larger view of what's going on in carbon tech, my view is that portions of the profession could well be replaced by carbon tech firms such as Watershed and Persephone. The technology of these firms, they map, measure, manage emissions, other environmental impacts, and they'll be part of the new corporate performance dashboard. Now, a quote struck me as very interesting and maybe very insightful, and that is coming from Lauren Riley, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at United. And she's looking at emissions accounting as a new form of currency. So if you think in those terms, it potentially has the potential to sort of sit side by side financial statements as a new way to look at the resources coming in and out of a firm. So I thought that was quite insightful in that particular statement. So next several years, we'll have to wait and see. We'll indicate which of carbon tech or the accounting profession will lead in critically supplying these mapping tools to help solve the climate crisis. So I want to thank you very much. Those are my comments or thoughts, and I appreciate any other comments or feedback from the reviewers and those who are attending today. Thank you.